This is home video of me and a bunch of my friends celebrating on New Year's Eve 2000, the dawn of a new decade.
It's my time, make a pop!
Everyone was worried about Y2K, sort of. 9/11 was almost 2 years away. Parties at my mom's house, located in my tiny hometown of Gresham, Nebraska, population 252, were a bit of a tradition within our circle of friends. This is my friend Bill. Bill was in my wedding. I was in his. He was one of my 3 best friends in the world.
Let's go, Billy!
That summer, Bill and I, along with our fraternity brothers, got the chance to sing the national anthem at a Chicago White Sox game. We drove all night, sang the anthem, and 4 of us drove back to Nebraska that night because we had to work the next day. We dropped Bill off at his Jeep in this parking lot around 8 a.m. on Friday, June 23rd, 2000. I hugged him, told him that I'd see him at the upcoming annual Gresham Bash and that I missed him and that I loved him. He said, "I know," and we went our separate ways. About 4 weeks later, Bill and a friend of his, after picking up a set of keys at her parents' house, disappeared. Vanished. Gone. Without a trace. The disappearance of Bill Rundle was the biggest story in Nebraska all summer long. So this film really begins here, in a nondescript apartment complex parking lot in Lincoln, Nebraska. The last place I ever saw Bill Rundle alive. I've always felt very fortunate that the last words I said to Bill were "I love you," but not everybody has the same story to tell.
We fully really don't understand what it feels like really to experience the death of a loved one until we have. And even if we have experienced it and we experience another death, depending upon obviously the relationship and the impact that that loss has, does vary on how much time we really need, how much support that we really need to continue to be able to navigate our tasks, our life tasks.
Growing up, my little brother Michael he's about 2 years younger than me, and he was always someone who would play around and joke around and very loving, but he had kind of a rough childhood. My parents separated when we were young. It pretty much kind of changed who he was a little bit. But he was always fun-loving and a big jokester when he was in a good mood with us. So when he was younger, we would do everything from playing Pretty Princess, regardless of that he was a boy. We would play outside, and our relationship was always very close when we were younger. And as he got older, we kind of drifted apart a little bit just because of some of the habits he took to and some of the people that he decided to hang out with. In middle school, he started getting very experimental with things like smoking weed and started hanging out with the wrong kids. I think he felt very isolated at that point. And I don't know if he turned to drugs at that point. It just became his coping mechanism, maybe. Pretty sure he was involved with a gang and involved with deeper drugs, heavier drugs, experimental.
See, we met when I was 7 years old. We started hanging out after school and started constantly trying to sit near each other in class just to make sure we could talk, and kind of started getting to the point that we were almost constantly inseparable. Like, we started to hold hands at times, and he'd always have his arms around me. I started getting the whole feelings for him and everything, and I could always tell that it was mutual because pretty much showing in his eyes. By the time all that started happening, we were 6th grade when it finally got to the point that we actually decided we wanted to date each other. It got to the point that I was constantly showing up bruised, like all over. I had bruises on my arms. I had a couple bruises on my neck from where he'd grabbed me. And I told him straight out when we had first started that I didn't care how bad he got. I'm still going to be there no matter what he does. I went over to his house and I pretty much explained to his mom and his sister about it, and they wanted me there to help confront him about the whole fighting thing. And I did, and it got worse from there.
Okay, we met online on an online dating site back in 2009, and we got married not too long after we started dating. Scott was pretty much the kindest person that I ever met. He was very accepting of any faults that I had, which was a new experience for me. He was a wonderful father to his children from his first marriage, which was another great thing to me because I wanted to have a family. He was just very loving and just a very calming influence in my life. Scott had lost his job, and I found out later that he had, I don't want to use the word lied, but he had lied to me about the timing of everything, which when I found out the truth made things make a little bit more sense to me.
In 2008, I had my daughter, and so it was a good uncle to her. He wasn't, I could tell how much he loved her. She very much so was excited whenever he'd come over, and it was his first niece, and so he was able to really bond with her and have a good relationship, and I knew he wanted to do right for her. But his addictions were too strong. His demons were definitely stronger than he was, and he was constantly, he wouldn't come around that often, or he would come over and he would be intoxicated, or he'd want to, he would do unsafe things. I was seeing a therapist, and I didn't want to let him back into my life at that point until he was able to get his stuff together. I really wanted him to prove to me that he was ready and able to have a relationship with not only myself but also my daughter, because I didn't want her to have a bad role model in her life. I really didn't want to see him. I was trying to do the tough love with him and not let him see my daughter until he was able to get his stuff together. But my dad kind of gave me the guilt trip, and he would tell me all the time that you never know when the last time you're going to see him, and you don't want to say anything. You don't want to say anything to him that you'll regret. And I kind of blew it off because you never really think anything's going to happen to you or to that person. You just always think there's time.
He went to try and hit me a couple times, but his mom stepped in and stopped him. And it just pretty much, I told him that I was tired of being hit all the time, and I was tired of being in a relationship with him if he was going to keep hitting me. He started yelling at me for getting his mom involved and yelling at me because his sister was there now. And it eventually got to the point that he just started hitting me, and I didn't fight back or anything. And his mom and sister came up because they heard me scream from the first hit, bruised like head to toe. I had bruises everywhere, like here, all up this arm. I had bruises all over my neck and my back. And he started running off because his mom was trying to get him to back off. And the only thing that I ever got to say to him as he was running out of his bedroom door was, "Thanks a lot, asshole. I really fucking hate you."
He had been fired at the end of December and didn't tell us that he had been fired until the beginning of January after the new year. The whole time he was carrying this burden around with him that he had been fired from his job and didn't want to ruin the holiday, so he didn't tell us about it. And I could tell that something was wrong. Then we got back from the holiday, and he got up and went to work, pretended to go to work the next morning, and came home about an hour later to tell me that he had been suspended from his job and he wasn't sure what was going to happen, if he was going to be fired or what exactly was going to happen. He was really concerned about telling me, obviously. He didn't know how I would react, and I assured him that I said wedding vows for a reason, and that this was one of those tough times that we had to go through and that we would get through it. And he got online that very day and found another job for himself, went back to an old employer that he had worked for. And I thought that everything was going to be okay, but he still wasn't acting like himself. He still was acting like something was troubling him. And I thought that it was just something that he needed time to get over. And once he started his new job, things would get back to semi-normal again. But that didn't happen.
We went to go eat with my dad and my mom, my daughter, myself, and my brother. And I led him around my daughter. And that was probably one of the last times that we were getting along and happy. I hadn't seen him for a while because he would kind of disappear and then he'd show up and disappear. And so he finally showed up, and it was, my sister was in town. And so it was all five of us plus my daughter in the house. And it hadn't been like that in years. We were getting along. Everything was fine. And then my brother wanted to, he wanted to take care of my daughter by himself. And I didn't trust him at that point to do that. And so we got into a huge argument. My dad was mad at me, and my sister was needing to go to the airport. So it was a big mess. And I wanted my brother to just leave. And I remember yelling at my brother, which was the last conversation we had, that he only made my life harder.
They helped me up and took me to the hospital because they were pretty much running out of Band-Aids for all my cuts and didn't have the right stuff. So they got me to the hospital and everything. His mom pretty much just told him it was a quick in and out. Don't worry, we'll take care of the rest of it at home. And so we get back to his house and we're sitting there. They're trying to make sure that I'm comfortable, make sure I'm okay. His mom's like, okay, well, he's not answering his phone. You try calling him. His sister called, got nothing. They grabbed my phone and tried to call him, and they were texting him and everything. His aunt had called and was like, what, you didn't hear? And his mom's like, didn't hear what? And she's like, well, they just called me and told me that he was in an accident. His aunt was like, well, you guys need to get back up here. And she's like, get back where? Well, by the time his mom said that, his sister had already grabbed the keys and had me out to the car. She knew exactly where to go. We get back to the hospital, like this is a good 6, maybe 7 hours after we had been there earlier for my cuts and bruises. His aunt pretty much explained like what happened, that as he was driving around, he was passing an off-ramp and a semi came down, hit patch of ice on the exit ramp and pretty much just slammed into the car. And she said that they weren't exactly sure what else had happened after that because when they got there, there was too many, like...
I got up on Monday morning to go to work, and it was unusual for him to stay in bed later than me. He was always up. When he was working, he was always up in the morning and gone before I even got up. And that particular morning, he did not get out of bed. And I got up and I started getting ready for work. And I was kind of annoyed with him because I couldn't turn the lights on in the bedroom. So I was trying to do everything in the dark and trying not to disturb him. And right before I left to go to work, I made a nasty comment to him. And I said something to the effect of, I can't believe that you're still in bed this morning and you're just messing up my whole routine for the morning for getting ready for work. And I was snippy with him about it. And, but I was frustrated. So that was my excuse. And then when I left, I came in and I told him I was leaving, and I kissed him goodbye and told him I loved him like we did every day. And I went to work, and then I felt horrible for what I had said. And when I got to work, I texted him and I told him, I apologized to him for saying what I had said. And he said, it's no big deal. Don't worry about it. I love you. So after school, when I was getting ready to leave, I texted him to tell him I was leaving, and I got no answer, which was very unusual. And I went out to the car and got in the car and started driving, and I tried calling him and got no answer, which was even more unusual. And when I got home, I walked in and everything was, it just felt like the atmosphere of the house felt different. And I came up and there was a note on the table, sitting here on the table for me from him. And he said a couple things that he said in there, well, I will never forget. And the thing that he wrote in there that I knew how the whole situation was going to end, was that he said that he hoped that I could forgive him, and that he hoped that the Lord would have mercy on his soul.
Each person's relationship to the deceased was its own unique relationship, that the circumstances also can make a complexity to the ability, again, with sudden death, such as suicide, the complexity of not having the ability to ask the why question. Or in cases where it was homicide, let's say, where someone else inflicted that death upon our loved one, and the oftentimes very heightened emotional responses, such as anger, can really also complicate the process in getting to the place of fully acceptance that this has happened in their lives.
From what they had told her was that it pretty much killed him on impact. And his aunt's like, well, come here, we got something for you. And so she takes me back into the morgue area, and she's like, just try to keep your calm, don't freak out. I know you're gonna cry because that's what you always do. And it kind of made me laugh when she said that. So we go in there, and we go back in there, and he's pretty much just laying there on the table, and it freaked me out the most because I was sitting there going in my head, Reese, move your finger, do something, just sit up, laugh your ass off, go, haha, I tricked you, and it never seemed to move or anything, and it just.
And so he stormed out of the house, and that was the last time that I saw him. I hadn't talked to him. I was still mad at him. And then a couple weeks later, my dad came over to the house, and then he told me that the cops had come to the house at 8 in the morning, and that he had gotten into a dispute at a gas station with a security guard. Don't really know the whole details, but that he was shot and killed. And I didn't really believe him at first, because I still don't really believe it to this day, because it just seems like he's just disappeared again and that he'll show up tomorrow. But I regret a lot of what happened and what led up to our last relationship, or how it was at that point in our last conversation. But we have no control over what happens and his actions that night.
So I called the police, and about an hour later, they sent somebody to the house, and they asked me questions. And about mid-morning, they found his truck. So they found him around 11:30 that morning. My pastor had been here from my church at the house with me, talking to me about things, just came to check and see how I was doing. And he left shortly before they found Scott. And as he was driving down the street, he thought to himself, what if they find Scott and he's alive and they need somebody to talk to him? Maybe it would be a good idea for me to stop and see how things are going there. So he pulled over and stopped and went over there. And I'm really thankful that he did, because he came back with the police officer. And he was the one that told me that they had found him. And I didn't know the whole story at the time behind why Scott did what he did. And as I've learned new things about it, it helps to make more sense. It's helped me to get into his head and understand why he felt he needed to do what he did.
There are assumptions that I think are made of what is considered grievable or impactful. And if someone hasn't experienced it, again, each of us in our process is unique. But if we haven't experienced it, sometimes we make assumptions of how a person's going to respond or whether they will be affected. Or we may be judgmental. And so when somebody completes suicide, we may blame the family members or the surviving members of the family for, how did you not see this? Or and not fully understanding the magnitude of what occurs or what has occurred prior that would lead a person to complete suicide.
So I'm just sitting there thinking, going, why did this have to happen to him? Why did it have to be the first person that I ever fell in love with or ever wanted to be with for the rest of my life? I told him that I was sorry and that I missed him. And pretty much as my final goodbye, I kissed him. I made sure that he knew that I was sorry for everything I did and everything I said, and that I'm sorry things had to happen the way that they did, and kissed him for a good 2 minutes. Knew he wasn't going to kiss back. His mom and sister were kind of freaked out, and a couple other people were, because I had covered myself in his blood when I kissed him. And when his mom had realized that I was clutching his necklace in my hand, she just kind of started bursting into tears.
He allegedly pulled a knife on the security guard. What we know that's been told to us is that he went in at 1 a.m. to a gas station in his neighborhood at 1 a.m. with a friend. They were already intoxicated and they wanted to go buy beer. The security guard told the clerk not to sell it to them, and there was some kind of an altercation inside the store. And my brother had a smart mouth when he was mad, and he probably said some inappropriate things to the security guard, which infuriated the security guard. And then all we know at that point is that he was shot and killed in the, he was shot multiple times in the parking lot of the gas station. That happened about 1 a.m. He was taken to the hospital, and he basically struggled to survive for 4 hours. His friend took off, so brother was by himself. We were not notified he was even at the hospital. We found out after he had passed at 8 o'clock in the morning, so 3 hours after he actually passed away. I mean, obviously, looking back now, you always assume there's more time. You always assume there's another day, and tomorrow's not guaranteed. And so if anything, I think more so now I realize, and I try to focus on living in the present.
Since that day, I have had many people tell me that they have some kind of connection to suicide in their life. And that's very appreciated. All of the support that I've had is completely and totally appreciated. And it's all been so heartfelt that I've just been overwhelmed. And 3 months later, I'm still overwhelmed. The best thing that I've done for myself is I've had a good mixture of keeping myself busy, but also taking time to grieve. Every time that I go to my counselor, she tells me that I'm doing a great job, that I'm doing everything right, and that I have to remember to take care of myself, and I have to do what's best for me right now, which is kind of great, because who doesn't like to, have an excuse to do nice things for themselves all the time?
I don't see a point of why I'm still here. Why didn't I go with him? And I slowly started not eating. I was pretty well catatonic for 2 months. I don't remember anything that happened. I don't remember any of it. I didn't even go to his funeral because I was gone. I started getting suicidal. I slit my wrist the wrong way and freaked my mother out. I guess it just kind of snapped something in me that was like, what am I doing? Why am I doing that again? Things started getting easier. I started hanging out with my friends more and being more talkative, and it just eventually got to the point that I was about as normal as I could be, even though I had this huge hole in my heart where he used to be.
He was only 23 years old, and I realized how truly life can be so short in a matter of seconds, really, in a matter of hours. I decided that anything that I want to do, I'm going to do, and regardless of how others feel about it, regardless of what others think I should be doing. And it's allowed me also to really focus on not having regrets, not ever wishing I would have done something differently. Just go ahead and do it, because I don't want to look back on my life and say I should have done that, or, because I feel like my brother wants me to live my life fully. I don't want to look back and say, oh, I wish I would have been more loving with my mom, or I wish I would have given her that massage because she hurts all the time. I wish I would have given her a hug. And so it's allowed me to just be a better person and truly focus on relationships, because that's, in the end, that's what matters, is those people that are in your life, not the things that you have or what you've attained in your life.
And trying not to avoid places that Scott and I went to together. And yes, it might be hard to go to some of these places, but I'm never going to create a new memory there if I don't go and try. And I know that Scott would not want for me to just shut down and quit living life and wallow and feel sorry for myself, because he wasn't that type of person. In fact, I had a dream not long ago that he was talking to me and just standing in front of me talking to me. And he said, "Laura, I'm okay. I'm in heaven. Everything's all right. And it's time for you to go on with your life." And I took that as it was his spirit talking to me and communicating with me that he is okay, because that has been a concern of mine, that he ended up in heaven instead of in other bad places. So to know that, to have him tell me that, is very comforting to hear. I'm kind of longing for that day that I have that sense of normalcy again, that I can just talk about the weather or what's going on at my job or things like that.
Most of what I learned from that relationship back then has pretty much helped me with the relationships that I've either tried to have or that I'm finally in again. If it gets to that point that I know I'm going to end up saying something that I'll regret, I'll try to hold it back as best I can. I'll run it through my head first if there's any other options before I ever say something like that. Most of the stuff that happened to me back then, I try to take day by day and make sure that I use it to the best that I can. Even though you can have tons of hardships and relationships can have their ups and downs and end either in a good way or a really bad way, that if you still have that strength and that will to do it, you can still live on, even get past it. Just take life the way you get it, and yeah, you'll have your good times, you'll have your bad times, you'll have your ups and downs, and sometimes your downs can be worse than your ups. But if you've got the right friends and the right family that actually care for you, that either way, you're gonna get through it.
I believe that people can learn from, the death of a loved one through just, I think that it naturally, as a result of the need to create a new normal, they do develop a new perspective on life, a new perspective in where they see their self in their life, their relationships with other people, their relationships with their friends and family members, that we make, I think, oftentimes more of a priority to say those things to the people around us. Sometimes the term closure alludes to the cutting off or shutting the door of the relationship. And I think it's more about integrating and adapting and learning to live alongside, creating ways of continuing that relationship, not in the physical form, but more through rituals and traditions, through talking about them, reminiscing, still continuing to keep them in the present form, through talking about the contributions that they made in their life and also to the community and to the world in which they lived in.
Chris was always a leader. I mean, Chris was not someone who, whether he was supposed to be in charge or not, Chris was just someone that when he came into a room, if things were not right, he would just immediately jump in and know how they needed to be put in right. And I wasn't surprised when he went to join the Navy. They really were able to hone the qualities and characteristics that God had given him to be a leader and to be able, he'd always been able to think calmly in the midst of chaos. He always had. Just being able to stay focused and do what needed to be done, whether everybody else around him was doing it or not, didn't matter. He knew what he had to do, so that's what he did. Sometimes even trying to boss mom, and, that didn't go over well. He joined the Navy in 2003, and he had planned on it being a career. He wanted to have a career in the Navy. But then he got hurt, and he hurt his back. And it was just more than because the medications he needed to be on, he couldn't be on them and be on a sub. God knew what his next step was. Chris didn't need to worry about it. Chris had to come to that for himself, that God had his hand still on him. God had a plan for him, and it was okay. Just relax. God will show you what you're supposed to do. So with Chris, you just kind of had to be easy with your words, I guess, so to speak, and because he just needed to learn for himself.
She was the first of 3 children. I was the baby. I was the third of 3, and I loved my dad, but he was pretty overbearing, and we never seemed to measure up to his standards. Mother was, great mother, but Dad was always, you could have done better, you should have done this. But he was always pretty hard on Faith, and she had a really bad experience. She had a Catholic school teacher, and Dad had a young boys youth group. My dad was a minister, and he had this youth group, and he was getting even Catholic boys coming to the youth group, and it seemed to make this Catholic teacher mad, and she picked on Faith, and she would humiliate her in the class and make terrible fun of her. She had her from 2nd to 3rd grade, and the 1st grade teacher she was her pet, and so it was such a contrast, and that really seemed to, along with Dad's strictness, and he was the hardest on her than he was of the 3 kids, and but that teacher just really kind of ruined her. She always felt stupid, and it was sad because she was really a genius IQ, and she had a brilliant mind. She had so many people write to her, and she was friends with people, and they'd say, "Wow, you've just got such a good mind," and stuff. But she never felt like she had a good mind. So.
It was in January of 2011 when he started working at Pizza Hut, and it just he loved it. One of the managers said, "Why are you at Pizza Hut? You could be anywhere. Why are you here?" And he loved his job. He loved the people. He loved driving. He loved meeting the different people in Joplin. He loved cooking. Chris and I, he had his oldest 2 girls were with the estranged wife's mother in Veneta, Oklahoma, and he had a visitation with them that day. So we got up that morning, and we were in Veneta by 10. And he got a really good visit with his daughters. And then he had to go to work that evening, which he had to switch with one of the other girls because he was supposed to be there that morning. And so then we drove back, and he'd had a really good visit that day. It was just really, really good. And he was so excited and in a really, really good mood. And so we got back to the apartment, and he'd went fishing the day before. And so he needed some freezer bags. And so he'd come up to the apartment, and we were talking and laughing and talking about some scripture because he could really see where God was working in the situation with his daughters. And we had one more hearing, June 9th of 2011, and Chris was supposed to get his girls back. The judge has already said, "I'm satisfied, you're fine." And so he was all excited. He just had a few more weeks, and he was going to get his daughters back and get his family the way he wanted it.
Faith was a wonderful pianist. She taught piano at the Bible College. She played the offering song, and she'd always pick something peppy, and she got standing ovations. And, it was so nice. She was able to relax in her piano playing because she seemed to be happy and content with who she was, and she was marvelous at the piano. And I was just so glad that the minister pointed out that she had come from having a lot of problems, and it was just kind of like it was a good time for her to go because she was at such a good place in her life at that time, because you don't know if she would have stayed there or eventually, gone back to self-doubt and self-hatred and things like that. She was always running herself down and talking about how stupid she was.
So we ended up talking about Matthew 7 and 8. We talked about those scriptures, and then he gave me a big old hug and said, "I love you, Mom. I love you a lot." Matthew 7:8 says, "Ask, and it shall be given. Seek, and ye shall find. Knock, and the door shall be open. Everyone that asks shall be given. Everyone that seeks shall find, and everyone that knocks, that door will be opened." And he's like, "Mom, I asked because the day before he really needed to know that Jesus was with him. And he asked Jesus to go fishing with him. And Chris said, I knew Jesus was fishing with me all day long. All day long, he was standing beside me on the bank, casting out just like I was. And so he was he was in a really good mood that day before he left. The world saw what I'd always seen in my son and all of my children. that God has given each one of them qualities and characteristics to use for His glory, things that He wants them to do for Him. And I knew that's who my son was. I wasn't surprised at all. Did that not mean that I wish for once he would have gotten himself to safety? I can't lie. I would love to have my son here, to be able to see him again and get that smile and that hug. But he was where he was supposed to be that day. I know that.
Not too long before she died, she just didn't care anymore. She was just going to live her life, and if people liked her, fine. If they didn't, fine. You know, that's kind of how you need to be all the time anyway. You just have to be who you are. Faith just decided that's what she was going to do, and she didn't worry about a lot of things, and just really enjoyed her life there at the end. She never had very much money, and she didn't always spend it wisely. And she was talking one day about how she didn't wear her jewelry very much because it was in all different places. And so we were in Walmart, and they had these cheap jewelry boxes. They had 2 styles. And I said, well, would it help you if I bought you a jewelry box? And she said, yeah, that'd be okay. But she never really was effusive in thank you. And so the day of the tornado, we usually went to church together, and then she came home with me, and I made Sunday dinner and then got her a care package, and she went home. And that day she was playing at a church in Webb City, which is on the way to Joplin from my house, and she didn't think she had enough gas to come out for dinner, so she was just going to play at the church and go home. And she said, Judy, I want to thank you for all the things you do for me. And just her saying that took me aback, because Faith just didn't say things like that to me. And I was playing a game on my computer, and I turned and looked at her. And when I saw her, I thought, I'm never going to see you again. And immediately I'm going, well, that was a silly thing to even come into my mind. And but she went on and said, you do so much for me, and I never really thank you. She was just so kind about it all. And I looked at her at least 3 times, and every time I thought, I am never going to see you again. And I never saw her again.
I was at the apartment, and we lived at the plaza behind the Walmart Range line, and our apartment was on the 3rd floor. And we'd been told right when we moved in severe weather, you come down and you get in the clubhouse in the men and women's bathrooms. They're where we go for safety. So I was tired. I'd been up since 5 that morning, and so I was exhausted. And so I had laid down in the bed, and I don't know which siren it was, but I heard a siren. And so I got up, got dressed again, put on flip-flops, grabbed the iPod, because I thought I was going to be bored, because I had no idea that there was a tornado coming. We got in the bathrooms, and we got down on our hands and knees, and then everything just, I was taken up with the tornado, and then it dropped me with debris, and kind of panicked, because I thought, I'm not laying here for 6 hours waiting for somebody to get me out. I'm not doing that. I'm a big girl. I can do this. So I got my leg unpinned, and we started moving debris. Didn't really think to call and check on anybody. That wasn't what I thought to do. Sometimes Chris drove, and I wasn't for sure whether he was driving that day, or so my thought was, well, he's driving. When he heard, he would go on to Brooks and make sure she was safe, since she was expecting the baby, and keep her safe. So for the thought that he was even at Pizza Hut, it didn't even cross my mind. I hadn't heard any radio. I didn't know how bad the devastation was. Hung a little bit there, and then the oldest daughter, who lives next door to us now, she drove up there and picked me up, and we came back here, and I didn't even look to the right. And I know God protected me, because I'm a visual person, and to have seen Chris's dead body would have been something that I would have never been able to get out of my mind. And I know God protected me from that, so I didn't have that. So we got over here, and now my husband, who works at General Mills, he knew Pizza Hut was gone. He had heard it in Home Depot, but he didn't tell me that. He tried to get there and couldn't, and then he came here. And the only one of the kids we hadn't heard from was Chris. And I knew in my heart, I knew he was gone. So Michael went down to Pizza Hut, and they had just found Chris in Aldi's parking lot. And so then he came home. And I already knew, but then he said he's gone.
It was about 10:30 and my phone rang, and I was in a deep sleep, and I was staggering trying to get to the phone, and voicemail came on, and it was a friend from Omaha, and she said, "Are you and Faith okay? There's been a tornado." And then I picked it up, and what she said was St. John's was hit pretty bad, and I said, "She's gone." I knew immediately she was gone. And you know, it's so funny because it's like, no, she's not gone. You don't know that. No, she's gone. You know, you just go back and forth every, millisecond. She's gone, she's here, she's gone, she's here. And a friend who had run into me at the Red Cross Center, she was so nice. She stayed with me and was there when I was reporting her missing. There's a hospital in Arkansas, and so I'd call the hospital. Do you have a Faith down there? No, I don't have anyone named Faith. And later I realized if she was unconscious, she wouldn't have been able to say her name. And of course, there wasn't anything left of the apartment. She wouldn't have had her license on or anything. But at the time, it was good because it kept me busy. Monday night, a cop from Kansas City, and his name was Casey. He was a detective. He said, "Judy, I'm going to be honest with you." And I said, "Okay." He said, "We have your sister. I've seen your sister. I identified her from her driver's license. And she's been here since the night of the tornado." You know, it was a relief to know she wasn't out in rubble, because they didn't get everybody the first night. And it sounds silly in a way, but that was such good news to me that they'd found her that night, and she had been in the morgue the whole week. And he said she didn't have a mark on her body. And he said it looked like she'd just been taken. When you're a Christian, that is the most powerful thing a person could say in a death like that. And I loved my sister, and she was so much fun. And I just pictured her having a blast going up there to heaven, just wheeing and having a great time going up there and just right into the arms of Jesus.
But I remember we got told so many different stories from different things, and the middle daughter, because we have his and mine, and the middle daughter had met Deidre and had talked some to Deidre, and I needed to talk to Deidre because Deidre had been right behind Chris. I needed to know exactly what happened then. It was very important for me to know what my son was going through and what was he doing from someone who would know.
Because I'm sure you're hearing a million stories. I was there. I want you to know what really happened. And then I think over the course of the next 20 minutes, I went into everything that happened. We didn't actually hear the sirens go off the first time. We heard the reports on the radio. So Chris and I both got together real quick and tried to figure out exactly how many people we had in the store and the best and fastest method to conquer and divide the entire store. And our protocol was to give the customers an option. If they wanted to stay, they could stay, but they had to go to the cooler. So Chris and I managed to get everybody, employees, customers, everything, with another manager. We all got everybody in the cooler. And the three of us huddled real tight together. And Chris said, hang on. And he ran out real quick, grabbed the bungee cord, wrapped it around his wrist, wrapped it over a rack inside there. All of a sudden, we started hearing all the hail. I remember Chris putting his arm around me, and he said, it's okay. And then we heard something really loud hit the side of the cooler. And I thought, oh God, this isn't going to hold. We heard another slam against the cooler, and then it just exploded everywhere. And I remember looking out and seeing him just kind of vanish with his arms outstretched. But it was bizarre because there was no fear in his eyes. It was just this look of, okay, this is happening. We kind of circled the wagons kind of thing and found who we could. It looks like a dirt pile everywhere you go. We kept looking for Kaylee and Chris. It was the two people we couldn't find. At least hearing somebody yell their name. And I remember standing there in the middle of the pile screaming for both of their names. It's the only two people I yelled for were those two. And of course nobody answered me. 19 of us went in, 14 of us came out.
I think Faith was ready to go. When BA, my minister, talked about how her attitude had been so good, she just seemed so happy and not so full of self-doubt and especially self-hatred. It was just such a good time for her to go, because I honestly didn't know if she would have kept that happy attitude and acceptance. When you believe in life after death, it's just a transition for you. And sometimes, every once in a while, I'll be out watering and I'll see something make me think of Faith and kind of talk out loud to you. You can do that when you live alone. And it's just kind of, it's just nice to have the memories and stuff and just know that she's in a better place now. But I do think about her and feel like she's still with me, and feel like if I ever got scared or was, had a major accident or something and was scared, that I would feel her comfort. In all of this, even though I miss my sister a lot, she's in such a better place. She's happy now, forever. And I just can't ever wish her back. And I'm so glad that she is safe in heaven, and that we had that really last conversation where she was able to explain to me that deep down she really did appreciate all those things I'd done for all those years. So it was just really a great ending to her life, because she had so many people come and talk to me about what a blessing she'd been to them, her piano students, the people she worked with. And it was really nice to know that she was watching all that from heaven and really got was able to understand that her whole life people really did love her for who she was.
It was very important for me to make sure that Deidre did not feel guilty for going home to her 5 children when I lost my son.
Her son essentially gave up his life for me to live. About a year after the tornado, I went back to college. I think it's important for her to know that at least one person out of those 14 people that survived took it serious, that, somebody else lost their life. And I have mine. It's important to do something with it, not just exist. We all go through life every day just letting life consume us. And I think it's important for us to consume life, not just let us lead around, but to go get what life has to offer.
Because I know from our conversation on that last day that my son was right with God. I know that. He had some rough patches before that with all the issues with the girls. So he'd been angry with God. But I knew from that last day that him and God were okay. And I knew that I would see him again in heaven. I have that hope. I have that assurity. There's not a doubt in my mind that my son's in heaven. I know that. And the fact that I got a hug and a I love you, Mom, even though he was running a little late, I got something a lot of people didn't get. I got that goodbye hug. I got that I love you, Mom. I just refuse to let what happened that day be the end of who I am and what God wants me to do on this earth. I just refuse to. There's too much to do that God wants me to do on this earth to stop and to not go on. You don't know when your last moment is going to be with somebody. So make sure that you're taking care of the most important things. If my house is dirty and I should die, well, so what? I'm not going to be here. It's not going to bug me. But what's important is to have that time with your loved ones. Because Chris was about life. He was about living. He was trying to save everybody so they would get out of there alive, to have life. So just realizing that every day, whether everything's going perfectly or everything's a major catastrophe, there's always something to be thankful for.
it's a yearning, it's a need to be able to say some of those last words, or making reconciliations within the relationship when there wasn't that ability to do that in the physical form. It's acknowledging all the aspects of the relationship. And so regrets and guilt and can often be very common. Sometimes it's more prevalent in sudden death. Although even in long-term illness or terminal illness, there is still a pulling to wishing that I could have done things differently, or we would have done this, or if we would have, seen the diagnosis earlier. I think it's still essential to validate those feelings. We often are quick to want to tell somebody, oh, it's okay, and you shouldn't feel that way, you shouldn't have regrets, or you shouldn't feel guilty. And I rather believe that we need to, again, allow that naturally to come forth, and that there is a need for that to be there for a period of time, and really work through that, through acknowledging, sharing the story, again, grieving, being emotional if necessary, or continuously kind of playing out those guilt and regrets, and then finding a way in which you can articulate that, or making peace within yourself as well as with the loved one who has died. Obviously, through this documentary and you giving the opportunity for people to share their story, I think story is an essential part of the process, and retelling and validating those emotional responses and events because they're pertinent, and being open and willing to trust in that moment that they can hear you, and that there is a peace that can occur with that.
My mom's name is Nancy Jane McGrain, and she was a nurse, a career nurse. So she by nature was a very giving person, spent a great deal of her life in service to other people, which was just her natural way of being. It was very easy for her to be that person. She was a wonderful mother and a really, really good friend, my best friend. She's absolute survivor type. And so after my dad left, our whole world kind of fell apart, and she had to take out personal bankruptcy. She had to go back to work, but she somehow managed to sail through all of that with a great deal of grace. I would say when I think about her now, I see what an incredibly strong person she was, but also what a graceful person that she was. She had a lot of dignity, was a very solid person in many ways.
I was born in a situation where my mom and dad were school teachers. My dad was a minister as well in a small town just south of Harrisonville, Missouri. So we spent a tremendous amount of time with my mom when we were younger. As a very young child, Dad just wasn't there very much. He was busy working during the week at school, and then on the weekends he was doing his ministerial duties for this church. So I became very close with my mom, and this came to fruition later on in her life as she got older and she became more sick. It took her quite a while for the arthritis that she had to kill her. She would often talk with me about her passing and what would be coming in the future, because I was much less emotional about it than my father was. Having had the experience that I had as a firefighter for the years that I had been, I was used to being around people who were dying or had just recently passed. So for me, it was not as emotional, and she could talk more freely with me. So during the last part of her life, we had some interesting conversations about death and dying and what might be coming, and her feelings on all of that. So I didn't become that much closer to my father till right before he passed. Right at the very, very end is when I became much closer with my father.
Really, in large part because of her illness, we were able to have a very broad and deep friendship. So that's something I'm grateful for. It's still, even after all these years, I think, oh, I can't wait to tell Mom. Oh yeah, bring it up. It's not an overstatement to say that I want to be like her in every way, in terms of how I treat other people and the way that I carry myself and the decisions that I make. Absolutely. And I hope that I honor her and I honor her memory in that way. One of my favorite pictures was a picture of my dad and my mom singing together. He had a beautiful Irish tenor, and of course he had the ukulele that I play now. And he bought her this piano, and she's playing piano in her robe and her slippers, and he's got his hand up on one knee leaning onto the piano, and they're singing and playing together. I remember those were happy moments for me. There was definitely a lot of music in my house.
Towards the end, we knew she was going, which leads us up to why we're talking, is that when she was getting ready to pass, it was what she said to me as that was coming, as the reason I wanted to talk with you today. Well, like I said, she was not always comfortable talking to my father about that. It was an emotional thing for him. He realized that his life was going to go on and that hers was going to be gone and that he was going to miss her. My father was an exceptionally honorable man. If he gave his word that he was going to be there, he was going to be there. He never failed to come home. He never failed to bring his paycheck home. He was there for my mom through thick and thin. He nursed her. He cared for her. And for her to have a conversation about, I'm going to be gone, honey, was not comfortable for her to do to him. So when she wanted to talk about the fact that she was going to be leaving our family, she oftentimes chose to speak to me. It's that last interaction that puts me and my mom in perspective, and that's the reason I told you about it.
My mom had emphysema, so she was ill for a long time, and it was a gradual decline in her health that happened over many years. So we knew that it was coming, and we knew that her health was degenerating. We really thought we had another couple years. Just judging by her own assessment of her physical state, she was an excellent patient, of course, because she was a nurse. It was that over that Christmas that she got this cold, and then I was down there. I was in Texas, and I was staying for a number of weeks. It was that January when I went back down, and she just really wasn't doing well. Now, I didn't think that she was going to die, but I did feel like I felt compelled to ask her if there was anything that she could tell me or anything that she wanted to impart to me, because it became evident to me that I wasn't going to get all of the things from her that I had hoped that I could, because we just weren't going to have enough time together. And I asked her if there was anything she could tell me, any lesson that she had learned that she could tell me.
We became aware that it was going to be something in the terms of somewhere in between 24 and 48 hours, and it was not going to be able to keep her alive. So we had come down to the point that we thought we would just stay in the ICU. They didn't need the bed right then, and instead of moving her to a room to pass, the ICU staff had volunteered to do the hospice care there. Consequently, that was the day when we decided to do that, was just shortly before I had been scheduled to speak for the first time as a guest speaker at a large 12-step meeting. I'm just might as well put it in here now. I'm coming up on 25 years of continuous clean and sober time in a 12-step program that's about alcohol and drug recovery. And at that time when my mom was passing, I only had about 7 or 8 years. Very unusual for someone with 7 or 8 years to be asked to speak for the whole hour at a public meeting. Usually that's reserved for people like where I'm at now at 20, 25, 35 years are the ones that they ask to come and speak for the whole hour. But this particular group had asked me to come and speak for the entire hour. Normally it's 2 or 3 people will go to speak at an open meeting, or one very long-term sobriety person would speak. So I had been kind of honored and asked by this group, say, we really would like to hear from you. And I had a conversation with my mom. She was getting sicker by the second. And I said, Mom, that tonight was that night that I was supposed to go talk at that group, and I'm going to go make a phone call and cancel it. And she says, no, you won't. I said, Mom, I'm not going to go talk when you're dying. You're dying, and I'm not going anywhere. And she says, oh, yes, you are.
she said that the only thing that she could tell me was that life was very, very short and that you have to live it right now. And that you need to stop doing the things that don't make you happy and that you need to start doing the things that you think might make you happy right away. Don't wait, because there's never going to be enough time. You're never going to have enough money. You're never going to get the perfect sign that tells you this is the time. You just have to live. You just have to try.
I said, but Mom, I'm not going to do that. She says, do you think that God got you sober for you to stay quiet about it? And she just floored me. I said, well, no. She says, what gives you purpose and what gives you meaning is that he saved you from that for you to carry the message to others. Isn't that right? I said, well, I am supposed to carry the message. She says, and you will go do so. I said, but Mom, you're dying. And she said, I'll be here when you get back, but you get out of this room and you go tell your story. That's what God got you sober for. It's what your purpose is, and you need to go. I'll be here when you get back. And she sent me away. So I went. And I told my story that night, mostly which was about the fact that I was going to grieve over my mom very, very soon. And I carried that message of that you didn't have to drink, you don't have to drug, no matter what goes on in your life. So my first time to ever speak as a guest speaker at a large meeting was to talk about the fact that no matter what, you don't get to drink, and that no matter what, you tell your story and you tell it the truth. You tell what's really going on. It's the purpose that you have for your sobriety. And that's what I got a chance to speak from the podium that first time as truly as a keynote speaker. And Mom waited for me.
Those words absolutely changed my life. For example, I always wanted to go to Europe. And every year your dad and I would talk about going to market in Europe. And every year we would think, we don't have enough money this year. Maybe next year the business will be doing better. And then we'd go to Minneapolis. And she said we had the trip all planned out and everything. And she said it was $2,400, which in 1978 seemed like a lot of money. And she said, and we just really struggled over it. And I wanted to do it. And at the last minute, your dad said, I don't think we should do it. Let's do it next year. And she said we didn't go on that trip. And she said, now I'm 66 and I'm dying. And I'm never going to go to Europe. What do you think that $2,400 means to me now?
By the time I got back, she had deteriorated badly. She was unconscious. Her heart was barely pumping at all. And when I got back, it was my turn to go in because everybody else had been in, and they allowed me to go right in as soon as I got back. And my family was outside waiting, and I went in to spend some time with her, and she woke up just briefly. And she looked right at me, and her eyes focused, and our faces were maybe 10 or 12 inches away from each other. And I saw her eyes focus on me. And then she closed her eyes. And a few minutes later, she said her last word, which was, "Oh, please." And then she stopped breathing. And a few minutes later, her body died. And I'm pretty sure that she was saying, "Oh, please, it's time to go." So the last thing she taught me was, whatever it is that I have in my life that I'm supposed to talk about, the purpose of my life is to talk about it. That I'm here to witness the things that happen. And that nothing stands in the way of that. She was a school teacher, she was a librarian. And the last thing she taught me was, what gives me worth and gives me value is the message that I can carry. Because there is a God. I'm not it. And that interaction that I have with God is what makes my worth. It's what makes it worth talking about. And that's exactly what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to talk about it. So here I am. I'm talking about it.
Don't wait. So I thought a lot about that. And I thought a lot about that after she died, especially because it wasn't lost on me that I feel fortunate to have had those times with her before she died. But I wish I'd given her more time even, Again, it was that just for myself, something that I struggled with a lot was the last year of her life, I kept saying I was gonna take time off my job and I was gonna go down there and just like move in for 3 or 4 months. And I was going to, and then I was going to later, and then I didn't do that, and I very much wish that I had. You just don't know when it's going to be the last time. You don't know how much time you have ever. I was very depressed for a long time and really had trouble moving through that grief. And a lot of it was because I felt that she had gotten such the short end of the stick in her life in terms of just being such a good person and such a giving, loving person. And she just had a lot of hardship in her life. And I couldn't reconcile why this would happen to her, why she didn't ever get to go to Europe or didn't, she never got to live her dream. And it wasn't until maybe more than a year after her death that I started to look at the circumstances of her life a little bit differently and to try to find something positive out of her death. Because I thought, otherwise, what's the point? What's the point of all this? What's the point of loving someone? What's the point of having someone so wonderful in your life if they're just, it's all just over so fast, and I felt like nothing had any meaning if someone like that could suffer so much, because she did. She suffered. She suffered all the way up to the day she died. We didn't have enough time to get hospice. It just happened so fast. And, we watched her suffer. It wasn't one of those peaceful deaths where everyone stood around the bed and she passed peacefully and there was a joy in that. I mean, it's heartbreaking.
Trust me, this isn't what I started out with. I originally picked up a camera because I thought it was a very cool green technology. So I bought a 1.3 megapixel Kodak point and shoot camera to do family photos with, just like vacation photos. And the first time that I shot with it was a friend of mine, a family friend, a young lady who had just gotten engaged. And she asked me, she says, that new digital camera you got? And I said, yeah. She says, those don't have to go anywhere to be developed, do they? And I said, well, no, they don't. She says, well, I just got engaged. I said, yeah, I think it's really great. She says, but I want to see if I can get something really nice to give to him as like an engagement present. Could you maybe help me get some pictures and something really kind of sexy and nice for him? And I said, well, okay, I'll give it a shot. A few months later, the same lady came back and said, they have a hot mamas contest on this radio station here in town, and I think that we did so good that we ought to be able to win that. So I bought this really nice negligee, and let's go take some more pictures, and we'll turn them into the contest. Well, there were some great pictures, and people began to really take notice of that. These pictures were designed with the idea that they really were going to be shown around. And when people saw them, they kept saying, you have an eye, you have an eye. And I finally asked them, what do you mean? They said, that means you really see something different through a camera. But I began to shoot with the idea that I was going to try and see where it took me. At first, I did a lot of glamour, which I did not think would really fly real well with for a minister's son. My mom was gone by this time, so my mom had passed, my dad was alive, and we were, like I said, we were in a kind of a disconnect with my dad. And so I took off on this career of taking pictures of people. And I'm really good at it. The eye that they say I have, I really do have. I see things in ways that not everyone does. I didn't expect some of the virulence of people in this part of the country about the way that I shoot, but I also was perhaps maybe hoping for a better reception than what I did get. It's like there are a distinct number of people, and for a long time I always thought my dad would be one of them. That the fact that there was nudity in the shot automatically made it a wrong, and that there was no place in their minds for anything to be nude or less than fully dressed, that they weren't comfortable with that. And I didn't realize the virulence of some of that. My father never took me to task for it, though, and I didn't find that out until much later. Why? And it was when he died. It's what he said.
And during that time, I was working all kinds of part-time jobs and had begun auditioning commercially. But by a year later, I had made the decision that I was going to be a full-time performer. And that has just been a blessing in so many ways to my life. I'm happier than I've been probably ever, and feel more content with my life. And that's all a direct result of that. Returning to music, returning to theater, certainly returning to film work. All of these things have happened because of my experience with her death. It changed my life. It was absolutely a crossroads. I think my mom's famous last words would be, "Life is short, live it now, and don't wait to do the things that make you happy." I think that my mom told me those words particularly to me because I think that she knew that I wasn't really doing what I should be doing with my life. But I do think that she meant that as sort of, I guess, a cautionary tale about her own life. It was important, that message that she gave me. That was an unusual conversation. That was not a regular conversation. We talked about everything together, but something so specific like that in a advice frame. And I like that it has gone on, that she gave that message to me and that I'm retelling that message. I do think that she knows somehow that that is going on, and it makes me feel better about her death. And in fact, that has been an incredibly positive outcome of such a terribly tragic thing, both for myself personally and the fact that that has helped other people just have an awareness about their lives. And I think anytime we get a chance to be more aware of our own life, that's a gift. And she definitely gave that to me. And if I can pass that along, if I can help her message keep going, that's fantastic. I hope she knows. I think she knows.
Well, as I said, my dad and I were not close as much when we were growing up. A lot of things around church together. Our family was very, very active in our church. Choir practice on Wednesday night. We would go to the prayer service on Sunday night, as well as sing in the choir and have Sunday school on Sunday morning. So we were very, very active. There was always a group of things going on with my dad, whereas with my mom, there was a lot more one-on-one time. So I didn't really become close with my dad until literally right at the very last part of his life. My father was in horrendous pain, to the level that the palliative care doctor, the doctor that's what he does for a living, is handles people's pain, had never seen anything like it. And this man that I thought had no character stood his ground. And just before they took him into surgery to try and clean him out and save his life, he prayed in front of his children. And I've never seen anything like it. The prayer that he prayed was simply this. I don't know if I can quote it back exactly, but I can give you the gist of it. God, I gave my life to you long ago. I don't take that back. I've never taken it back. If this is what you want from me, if this is what you're asking is that I live in this pain, then so be it. I will do it. I will do whatever you ask me to do. Whatever you bring me, I will face. Like I said, I've been a firefighter for a long, long time. I've been coming up on 28 years as a firefighter. I've never seen anything like that. It was something above and beyond anything that I've ever witnessed. I've never seen that level of pain in anyone. and then seeing them very clearly say, I will face it. If that's what it's going to be, that's what my life will be, then I will do so. He went into surgery. It bought him a little bit of time, but the damage was already done. And eventually he began to deteriorate even more. And when it came to a place where it looked like he had come to wherever he was going to be, that he was likely not going to live much longer, but that he looked like he had stabilized after the surgery, I had my last conversation with him, and he basically told me this. He said, you know, your art is not art that I would have chosen to look at. It's not my art. It's not what I would consider something for my own wall. One of his favorite sermons to preach was that God was the author of your life and that he wrote things into you. Last thing my father said was, I was telling him goodbye. I was saying, Dad, I got to get back to Kansas City for a little while. If you need me to come back, I'll come back in a few days. And I was leaning over his bed to tell him goodbye, and he's very, very weak and still in a tremendous amount of pain. But he struggled to tell me this. He said, your art is not my art, and it's not what I would have chosen to look at. But I could still see that it was a talent that God had written into you, and therefore it was good. I just want you to use it wisely, and I'm proud of you. My dad set me free.
I believe there is no right or wrong way to this process, and I believe that every person's reality and what that reality is for them, and if it is comforting to acknowledge and to embrace, I believe that people can learn from, the death of a loved one through just. I think that it naturally, as a result of the need to create a new normal, they do develop a new perspective on life, a new perspective in where they see their self in their life, their relationships with other people, their relationships with their friends and family members, that we make, I think, oftentimes more of a priority to say those things to the people around us.
My famous last words would have to be to live with no regrets, because in my short time of being on the earth and experiencing my brother's passing when he was so young, I've just really tried to live with no regrets and make decisions that I want to make, what's best for me, regardless of what others think, so that I can look back when I'm older, or if something were to happen to me tomorrow, and not have any regrets of something that I should have done, or wishing that I would have did something different. So I think that's what I would choose.
Really honestly, the thing that jumps out at me is that I'm not afraid to die. I used to be afraid to die, and now I'm not anymore. Like I said before, I think I'm a lot more loving towards the people who are important to me, and I tell them that I love them more often than I ever have in my life before. My friends, my family. My family has never been an I love you family. It's always, just implied that we love each other. But since Scott's death, I say it to them more often than not. Sometimes I make them uncomfortable, I think, by saying it, but they understand where I'm coming from, too. Can I quote Tom Hanks from Sleepless in Seattle?
You may.
I get out of bed every morning and try to remember to breathe in and out.
Reese, the last thing I ever said to you was that I hated you, and even though I didn't say it, I still voiced it in my head that I never wanted to be with you or be around you or deal with any of that crap again. But even though it didn't come out the way I meant it, I really meant to say that I love you, and no matter what, I would miss you, and that even though you had done all the stuff that you did to me, I will still always love you, and I forgive you for all of it.
You never know when it's going to be your time. You just need to be ready, like Faith was, ready to go. If it's your time.
I think my last words would be, I lived my life wholeheartedly and through love.
It could have gone many different ways. She could have hated me for surviving. You know, her son didn't, and I did. I could. Watching people in Joplin, I think a lot of them have learned compassion. I think a lot of them have learned to not just take for granted the friendships and relationships they have around them. I don't know about you. You were talking about it earlier. That Chris had said he loved her before he left. And I remember as a kid, my mom always told me, you don't know when you're going to walk out that door and be in a car wreck. Always tell the people you love them before you leave. So that the last things, it doesn't matter what happened before that, the last thing they know is you love them.
It drew me closer to God. I've always been close, but it drew me closer. I went to a couple of counseling sessions about a month after Chris's death, and she tried to explain to me that it was normal if I didn't feel close to God, that was a normal thing. And I just said, look, I've never been normal a day in my life, and I'm not going to start now. That's not good enough. I can't make this without God. I just can't. I have seen God pour out blessings to not just us, but to people around us. The miracles that happened. That was an EF5 tornado. There should have been more than 161 lives that we lost that day. The thing that I've learned is life's important. The people around you. Stop looking about what you see on the outside. What's in the heart of a man or a woman? What are they going through? What are they dealing with every day? Can a smile make a difference? Can a look in the eye make a difference to them? Even the people that don't have money, whether they're stealing, robbing, if they're standing there on the corner, you still look them in the eye. You make that eye contact. You make sure people understand they are important and they're valued and they're cared about. And to me, that's important.
So this is the poem that I found in the unmarked envelope in her desk after she passed away, which I've come to now see that this is the letter that she left for my sister and myself. It's a poem by Henry Scott Holland, and the title is Death is Nothing at All. Death is nothing at all. I have only slipped away to the next room. I am I, and you are you, and whatever we were to each other, that we still are. Call me by my old familiar name. Speak to me in the easy way, which you always used to. Put no difference in your tone. Wear no forced air of solemnity or sorrow. Laugh as we always laughed at the little jokes that we enjoyed together. Play, smile, think of me, pray for me. Let my name be ever the household word that it always was. Let it be spoken without effect, without the trace of a shadow on it. Life means all that it ever meant. It is the same that it ever was. There is absolute, unbroken continuity. Why should I be out of mind because I am out of sight? I am but waiting for you, for an interval, somewhere, very near, just around the corner. All is well.
My mom and dad were both educators. And the last thing they did was taught me how to live. One, to speak the truth no matter what. And the other, to make sure that I did it in a beautiful way and with wisdom and dignity and pride. I didn't understand my dad's depth of character until he passed. And I guess that's okay. Everything's here for a reason. in everything that I am, if I'm truthful and honest about it, and I express it with dignity and courage and pride and wisdom, it's going to be okay. So that's going to be the message of my life, I think. I think my mom and dad's lessons are written in me. And that's not such a bad thing. Done. Okay, I'm done.
And we're all here together because we're all family. And we couldn't have, I couldn't have picked a better family. To my friends that I have here. Amen.
On the night of August 17th, 2000, Bill Rundle's Jeep flew off the road and crashed into this drainage pit, submerging the Jeep, killing Bill and his passenger. Authorities didn't find the Jeep and their bodies until nearly 2 years later. My brothers and I sang at Bill's funeral. This film is dedicated to your memory, Billy. I love you.